Hello, about to finish up the language section of this unit. I'll start with a kind of recap with what we did in class today, if you need it. If you were there for it, then you can just fast forward to the part you need. As I say that, I realize I just dated myself with saying fast forward. You can skip to the part you need. We were talking about this a bit in class, looking at the 7 fundamental units of measure upon which all other units are derived. We have the kilogram, right, which gives you the weight about 2.2 pounds on Earth, right? Meter, about 3.281 feet in length. The second is a unit of time, right? Kelvin is a unit of absolute temperature. The mole is a number of molecules, atoms, something like that. An ampere is an electrical current, and candela is a measure of luminosity intensity, so the brightness of light. Obviously, this is not going to be on your test. This was to get you to think about what a fundamental unit of thought would be. And I was suggesting, while extremely flawed, I know, I was suggesting that we could consider the word as a fundamental unit of thought. Because obviously, the more words we know, we have a greater capacity to think. So with a larger vocabulary, we can experience more nuances in emotional expression and in feeling, intensity, being able to control that. More experiences, we can be in touch with more things that we wouldn't have been able to experience otherwise. We can form more concrete memories. Obviously, I know that it's flawed, but it's interesting to think about it that way. So language, these forms of words that are combined to represent meaning. They enable us to know more than we can ever take in through our senses alone. It's how we can understand history or somebody else's experience. We don't have to actually live out everything. We have words, and words will take us there. There are some universals when you're looking at language, regardless of the language. And I'm going to go through each of these separately at different points. And I don't expect that you know them all. It's more interesting to recognize it. We will look at semanticity, arbitrariness, flexibility of symbols, naming, displacement, and productivity or generativity. So to kind of explain how this works, so the sounds of human language convey meaning. Not all sounds, although I gave you an example of how something like coughing or clearing once, so it actually can give meaning sometimes. But changing a word slightly changes the meaning. So we talked about this in emotional expression, like how many different words can I come up with for being mad, right? I could say I'm mad. I could use ire. I could use apoplectic. I could whatever. I can mention a whole bunch of words, and they each bring a different level of emotional reaction to it. But I could take another word and where maybe you might have an emotional reaction to it, it still tells you something a little bit different. If I were to take a word like dull and start with that, and you would go with some synonyms, let's say, for dull. If I said boring, I'm saying, okay, well, there's a deficiency in my interest. But I could then say stupid, right, to represent dull, suggesting that there's a deficiency in intellect or intellectual ability. Something that's dull would be not bright, perhaps. So it's not as colorful or not as clear. I could say that it's not loud or distinct. That would also be dull, like the sound is dull. I could say that it's not sharp. So I could take one word and look at it in a number of dimensions, and thus that's the semanticity. When breaking down words into their component structures, or language in general, into its component parts, we'd start with phonemes. So in a spoken language, the smallest distinctive sound unit is a phoneme. So I'm sorry, I had to correct a mistake I just made there. In my slides, it said that there were 34 phonemes in the English language, but that's incorrect. There are 44 phonemes in the English language. Chug has 3 phonemes. You have that CH together makes that one sound, then the U and the G. So 3 phonemes. A lot of the consonant phonemes are kind of easy to hear. So if I were to say bat, you hear that B, right? Look at those like initial consonant sounds. Cat, you hear that k sound at the beginning. Dog, duh. You can hear that. And then when you get to other types of combinations like SH, so if I were to say ship, that SH makes one sound. Thin, that TH makes a sound. at the end, you might see that NG together. Like if I were to say ring, that NG together would make one sound. So those are consonant phonemes. When you look at phonemes in vowels, you're going to see, you might have the standard like ah, or that sort of thing, where it's easy to kind of tell. But if I put two E's together, let's say, as in the word feet, it's going to make a different type of sound than one E would make. Putting IGH together makes a very specific type of sound. Two O's together, a UR, as in like hurt, that UR would count as a vowel phoneme. URE would be another one. If I were to like sure, if I were to say sure, you hear that URE as one phoneme. Morphemes, on the other hand, are the smallest unit of language that carries meaning. Most morphemes, not all, are made up of two or more phonemes. This would include prefixes, suffixes, root words. So when you look at a word like undesirables, you start with the root word, desire, right there. And then this negates it, this changes what it is altogether, the able, and then this makes it plural. So undesirables would mean that you have 4 morphemes. So really, anything that you can add to a word that would change its meaning would be a morpheme. If we look at this sentence, let's see how many morphemes we have in this sentence. So the would stand by itself, the. Strange means something, right? But then that would make it a person, right? A strange person. And the S means there's more than one. When we look at the word talked, we have talk, and this means that it happened, the ED means it happened in the past. So the strangers talked, two is by itself, that's one morpheme. Another morpheme. Play, is going to make it people, right? And S makes it plural. So this sentence has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 morphemes. And how we put this all together is going to be through grammar. So this is the system of rules that enable us to communicate with each other. Yes, there is a certain arbitrariness to them, but when it's accepted, we can convey meaning effectively. Semantics are the set of rules we use to derive meaning from morphemes, words, and sentences. So we're combining really a lot of morphemes here, and we're talking about this with semanticity. But I know that if I add an ED to something, I make it past. If I add an ING to something, I put it in the present. And your syntax are the rules that you have for putting words in a certain order. In English, we know that adjectives come before nouns. So I might say white house in English, where in Spanish, I would say house white. I know that based on syntax rules, I need to put an antecedent before a pronoun. I need to add an ly when a word is an adverb in many cases. And there is an arbitrariness to language. There's no inherent connection between the symbols in a language and the meanings they convey. Knowledge of a language requires knowing these arbitrary connections. So if I were to just take some letters, or phonemes, if you will, so I were to take CAT, by themselves, rather meaningless, right? But if I put it together to sound out or to say cat, I know I'm talking about a feline, right? If I change the order of the same letters and make it ACT, then I'm talking about an act instead, and that might mean something like part of a play or a dog and pony show. This isn't knowledge that's intrinsic. This is knowledge that we kind of build upon as civilization moves on, and it changes, it adapts. There's a flexibility of symbols. So due to the arbitrariness of language itself and the rules, we can change the connection between symbols and meanings and invent new words for things. So something that was once a horseless carriage is now called an automobile. You can look at other words that have changed over time. So at one point, to use the word nice meant that you were calling somebody simple or foolish. It was actually a pejorative. It was a derogatory comment, saying that basically they don't have stellar mental capacities. And nowadays, we look at a word like nice and we have a positive connotation. What do you think of it? I think it's nice. You like it. Maybe you don't love it, but you like it. Another word that has changed is a word like the word dumb. It used to mean somebody who was mute or silent, somebody who didn't speak because they couldn't or because they didn't. But now when you're saying dumb, you're basically saying like, oh, like they're stupid, which is very ableist. I wish we'd stop doing that. Other words change, like mad. I might say that I'm mad, that I'm angry, but mad also used to mean like insane or crazy, and now it's used as like an adjective to describe something that people like oh, or something that somebody's good at, like you've got mad skills, something like that. Wicked used to be something that was terrible, right? Something that was bad, and now you might say somebody is wicked smart. Or how about a word like egregious? Egregious used to describe something that was just not common, something that was ordinary. And now if you say that somebody has like egregious behavior, it's offensive or unnecessary. You made an egregious mistake. It was this awful mistake. It's not what it used to mean. And every once in a while I stop to think about it, like when somebody uses a word like moot, right? Like it's a moot point, and they usually mean like there's no point, it's a foregone conclusion. But the word actually means that it's debatable. Otherwise, why would we have a moot court? I'll stop there because I could keep going on about this. Naming. So we assign names to all the objects in our environment, all the feelings and emotions we experience. Even if we do not know the name of something, we assume it has a name. The act of naming something also makes it become something for us. So a lot of times when somebody gives something a name, you see it differently. Again, it just, that word, that name, it's going to change the way you look at something. It's going to change the way you organize something. Displacement's a pretty important one. So language enables us to talk about things that we weren't present for maybe, or that aren't happening in this present moment. We can think about the past, reflect on the future. We can hear other stories, remember stuff, anticipate stuff. So it can put us in sort of different places and time, give us different experiences. And based on the vocabulary that you currently have, which I know will continue to grow, we can generate an infinite number of sentences. You will never go through another day repeating the words that you said today, the exact words that you said today. I think in order to do that, you would have to say very little, very, very little. But when it comes to developing language and how we learn to understand it, we know that language acquisition moves from simple ideas to complex ideas, and we know what that looks like at the beginning. Language is believed to be acquired because you learn more words than you are ever consciously taught. And sure, some of this is going to be done through modeling, through what you hear in your environment, but nobody actually had to teach you the breakdown of language for you to understand how to speak. When it's a language that's not in your environment and you weren't exposed to it in a critical period at a very young age, then yes, you will have to break it down. But the best language, the language when you speak it fluently, you will be submersed in it. And when you look at right now about how many words you probably know about 80,000 words. And after the age 1, you average about 13 words a day. This is not a linear thing, though. It's not going to keep on going infinitely, but you will continue to learn new words throughout your lifetime. And when you start out as babies. Newborn babies are in a pre-linguistic stage. They make funny noises, like that sort of thing. You might hear them do, and they cry. And there's a few basic things a few basic reasons that they cry, a few things that they are looking for: to be fed, to be held, to be changed, a little stimulation, that sort of thing. And it is the only way that they can communicate, babies, for the most part, at this stage when they're first born. And so you don't worry too much about, developing a bad habit, picking up the baby every time he or she cries. It really doesn't matter. They're not going to stay like that forever. And really, you want the baby to learn that they're communicating with you and that you're listening. Around 2 to 3 months, a child will start cooing. And when they're cooing, they're making only vowel sounds, that ooh, ah stuff. It's very cute. The next stage would be the babbling stage. That happens around 3 or 4 months. The infant will start making consonant sounds. And it will not be limited to the phonemes in the infant's household or in the language spoken in their environment. They will make sounds made in any culture, regardless of what they're actually hearing. But that changes. About 10 months of age, the child will stop babbling in sounds made in other languages, and they will only start babbling in the sounds that are really made in their environment. And somewhere between 1 to 2 years, a child will start using one word to convey an entire meaning, like a whole sentence. So here a kid might say no, and obviously that they've conveyed everything. Cookie, want, that, something, just one word to convey the whole thing. After that, they will go to the two-word stage, and this happens in and around age 2. They will use 2 words to communicate meanings. This is also called telegraphic speech. What you'll want to notice here is that they will use those 2 words in the correct order. They'll follow the syntax rules, for the most part, of the language that they're hearing. So if they're going to say want cookie, they're going to put it in the right order. And it is important to note that there is no 3-word stage. They will move from the 2-word stage into a lot of simple sentences. And in these sentences, they're going to make a number of mistakes with overextending and overgeneralizing. This chart shows you that we're all born to recognize speech sounds from all of the world's languages. You take something like this, like percentage of people able to discriminate Hindi Ts. Somebody who is a Hindi-speaking adult, 100% of the time, they should be able to discriminate that sound. But if you look at infants from English-speaking homes, starting over here, right? So infants from English-speaking homes in and around 6 to 8 months, they will be able to discriminate that over 90% of the time in that zone. 8 to 10 months, over 60% of the time. But see that 10 to 12 month, you notice a drop, and it becomes 30%. And as people become English-speaking adults, they will recognize it very infrequently. Next, we want to look at how we explain language development. So first of all, looking at the behaviorist and what somebody like Skinner, remember he was all about operant conditioning, rewards, punishments, that sort of thing. Bandura, social learning, modeling, that sort of thing. And they would explain that we learn it through reinforcement and through social learning theory. So Skinner would say, when a child learns to say cookie, they get rewarded by getting a cookie. Or, they say mama for the first time, and so everyone's like, oh, mama, and they clap, and that's it. And then eventually the kid gets used to saying mama and doesn't get the reinforcement, so they add to that. And they'll say another word and look for that reinforcement once again. Notice there's no need for punishment here, right? The child will communicate to get what they want, and the reinforcement is on the other side of it. And with modeling, you will notice that a lot of times kids will say things the way they hear it in their household. The way the people they look up to say these things, they'll pick up on a lot of that stuff. When you look at all of the learning theory terms that go along with this, and I'm not going to explain them all, like positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, extinguishing, discrimination, try to make your examples go with language so it specifically fits what this model would look like. And I believe I had added a term on there that may not be in the chart, the term differentiation. And so that's understanding that the way in which you say something or respond to something affects whether or not you earn the reinforcement. So if I were to yell, cookie, I might not get it. But if I were to ask sweetly, cookie, I'd be more likely to get it. And a child will learn that very quickly. And they pick up on that sort of thing with when they're hearing other people use it in their environment as well. Now, Noam Chomsky's view of how we learn language is pretty much the accepted way. There will be some behavioral stuff for sure, but he's going to focus in on the fact that we acquire language too quickly for it to be learned. So he's going to say that there are some flaws in the behaviorist sort of approach to learning. He describes it as you have almost this learning box inside your head. Obviously, it's not a physical learning box, but there's this innate capacity to learn language, and it just sort of is what it is for you. So you may have an enormous learning box, so to speak, or a smaller learning box when it comes to learning language. And it's going to be your experience that determines sort of which switches, if you will, get thrown. So like you're exposed to this, that switch goes on. You're not exposed to something, it goes off. Obviously, that's just a way of explaining how you learn in the brain in a simple way, but that's how he does it. He noticed that children had a tendency to overextend. So overextending is when you use one word incorrectly to mean many things. So if a child sees a doggy, let's say, and every time they see a dog, they call it a doggy, and they're right, but every time they see any furry animal, they call it a doggy. I know my kids when they were little, Jack and Charlie, they would call everything Coco, because Coco was the name of my mother-in-law's cat. So they'd say Coco, Coco Meow. That's what they do. And so I would know, we'd go to the zoo and I know when they spotted an animal because they'd be like Coco Meow. And but it didn't matter what they were pointing to. It could be a turtle, it could be a polar bear, and they would act like everything was a cat. That's overextending. Overgeneralizing is when you use grammatical rules where they don't apply. Like a kid may learn to put an ed at the end of a verb to make it past tense. And nobody has to actually explicitly tell them that, but they will pick up on this. And so they will start to say things like, I goed to the store instead of I went to the store. Or she teached me how to do that. So they're going to take those rules. They know to put an ed there, and they will put it where it doesn't apply. They won't know all the exceptions. So again, Chomsky said we have this inborn universal grammar, and he described it as a language acquisition device. So these, like I said, these grammar switches are thrown as children are exposed to language. They go on if you're exposed to it, they go off if you're not, and that's how he described it. And this parametric theory is that children are born with advanced knowledge of certain options. Experience determines which ones they will use. So again, it's that nature-nurture. He's saying, like, nature just gives you what you have, and nurture determines ultimately what you will have access to. And really, that access comes at critical periods. While humans are resilient, if you're not exposed to certain things in a critical period, your ability to learn them and do them later on will be inhibited. And then the question comes, does language influence our thinking? And I think based on everything we've done in this unit, obviously, I would be lying to you or telling you an inoperative statement if I told you that language does not influence our thinking. That's the whole basis behind cognitive therapy, is to change the word and get the benefit of the emotional relief. If I go from I'm devastated about something to I'm upset about something, that's not as extreme. And Benjamin Lee Whorf came up with this concept of, and I'm putting here linguistic relativity, but he said it stronger than that. And there's some confusion about how this went. And I think the word determine is a misunderstanding of what he meant. But the thought was that language determines the way you think. So you look at a tribe, like the Hopi tribe has no past tense in their language. So Whorf would say that they could rarely think about or reflect about their past because they didn't have words for it. That is an overstatement. It's pretty clear that that's probably not actually what he meant. And so does language determine the way we think? That's too strong of a way to state it. Does language influence the way we think? Yes, it does. Greater vocabulary and greater ability to think about stuff, for good or for bad. And think about this. Like, if I were going to say that I'm firing someone, what could I say, firing them? Or could I say that they were outplaced or dehired or non-renewed? Totally different things. And when you're translating something from one language to another, you also are going to have a different reaction. So Pepsi used to have an ad that ran, come alive with Pepsi. And when that was translated into Japanese, it was coming across like Pepsi brings your dead ancestors back from the grave, which is a very different sort of thing than I think Pepsi intended. And we talked about that masculine gender in writing. So you use the word he, and it actually makes people think of male genders, not any gender. And lastly and briefly is the question of, do animals think? It turns out that animals, especially animals like great apes, display remarkable capacities for thinking. They can form concepts and classify different animals, like, say, cats and dogs. And once they form these concepts, you can see through brain imaging that they have a different response to things that are cat-like versus dog-like. And Kohler was one of those people that showed us that that chimps have this ability to problem solve. You see in this example, you see a chimp trying to figure out how to put certain things together to essentially make a tool to achieve their goal. They show thinking that is also insightful. So by insightful, I mean we don't know the strategies that led them to be able to do what they do, but they are able to figure it out. So again, you have bananas that are out of reach, and you have these crates all around the room. They will learn or know somehow to put them together and stack them so that they can reach what they're looking for. Same sort of thing here, or similar sort of thing here. They have different size sticks. They want to get that banana. They can use one of the smaller sticks to grab one of the longer sticks, and use the longer stick to grab an even longer stick until they can reach the banana. You take these chimpanzees and you put these peanuts in a tube, and the chimpanzee with differing sets of tools here, this would be one that they could learn to stick it through the tube to push the peanuts out. Or they would have to learn to not, to unbundle these, I guess, to, remove them from the bundle so they can get a single one and take it out. Or in here they'll have to know or figure out to remove the pegs so that they can push it through the tube to get the peanuts out. So there's delayed response problems, these tasks in which an animal must remember the solution to a problem before responding. A delayed response problem would be a task that's used to study short-term memory in animals. Another type of problem would be the multiple stick problem, which I showed you a picture of. Several sticks increasing length and are arranged between the cage and the desired goal or the object, and they have to figure out how to use a shorter one to get a longer one, etc. And so the conclusion, animals are capable of delayed responding, planning for future actions, tool use. They have a little bit of short-term memory, right? They have some short-term memory. They can do simple problem solving that imply a basic level of thinking capacity. And if you have a pet, you know that animals can also be very good at communicating. It's very clear that an animal can tell you, like I have a dog, and she can tell you when she wants to go for a walk or when she wants to go outside. She lets us know when she's hungry, even if that means just like going by her water dish and start bumping it from underneath. She'll start bumping it with her nose. Or like, if she's hungry, you get the nose under the elbow thing. She starts lifting it up.